It was Christmas Eve on a Friday. The shops were full of cheer, with tinsel in the windows and presents twice as dear. 1,000 Father Christmases sat in their little huts, and folks was buying crackers and folks was buying nuts. All up and down the country before the light was snuffed, turkeys they got murdered and cockerels they got stuffed. Christmas cakes got marzipanned and puddings they got steamed. Mothers they got desperate and tired kiddies screamed. 100 weights of Christmas cards went flying through the post, with first-class postage stamps on those you had to flatter most. Within 1,000,000 kitchens, mince pies was being made. On everyone's radio, White Christmas, it was played. Out in the frozen countryside, men crept about on their own, acking off the holly what other folks had grown. Mistletoe in willow trees was by a man wrenched clear so he could kiss his neighbour's wife he'd fancied all the year. And out upon the hillside where the Christmas trees had stood, all was completely barren, but for little stumps of wood. The little trees that flourished all the year were there no more, but in 1,000,000 houses, dropping their needles on the floor. And out of every cranny, cupboard, hiding place and nook, little bikes and kiddies' trikes were secretively took. Yards of wrapping paper was rustled round about, and bikes were wheeled to bedrooms with the pedals sticking out. Rolled up in Christmas paper, the action man was tensed, all ready for the morning when their fighting life commenced, with Tommy guns and daggers all clustered round about. Peace on earth, goodwill to men, the figures seemed to shout. The church was standing empty, the pub was standing packed. There came a yell, "Noel, Noel!" and glasses they got cracked. From up above the fireplace, Christmas cards began to fall, and trodden on the floor said, "Merry Christmas to you all."
Once there was a snowman who stood outside the door. He wished that he could come inside and run about the floor. He wished that he could warm himself beside the fire so red. He wished that he could climb upon the big white bed. So he called to the north wind, "Come and help me, pray, for I'm completely frozen, standing here all day." So the north wind came along and blew him in the door. And now there's nothing left but a puddle on the floor.
It was a cold and dark December night many, many, many years ago, and on the hillside, where the icy winds whistled through the dark trees, "I can whistle, miss!" And the grass was frosted and stiff with cold. "Do you want to hear me whistle, miss?" "Not now, Dominic, thank you. Perhaps later. Listen to the story, there's a good boy." Matthew, the little shepherd boy, huddled in a dry hollow with his sheep to keep warm. The cold winter wind blew about his ears, and high above him the dark sky was studded with millions of tiny silver stars. "Miss Sterling gives you a silver star if you do good work." It wasn't that sort of star, Dominic. These were tiny diamonds sparkling in the darkness. This was the night that a very special baby would be born. "Jesus!" That's right, it was Jesus. "I've heard this story before. I know what happens." We all know what happens, Dominic, and we're going to hear what happens again. Why? Because we are. Now, soon a very special baby would be born, and his name, as Dominic has already told us, would be Jesus. Was he induced? Pardon? Was baby Jesus induced? No, He wasn't induced. I was induced. Well, baby Jesus wasn't induced. How do you know? Well, I know because it was a long, long time ago and they didn't induce babies then. Why? Because they didn't. Just listen to the story and then we'll find out all what happens. But I know what happens. Well, we're going to hear what happens again. Miss? Yes. What is it, Elizabeth? What does seduced mean? Oh dear. I sighed wearily, catching sight of the teacher attempting to hide her laughter behind her hand. I will tell you another time when you're older. Now, let's get on with the lovely Christmas story. And then, amidst the tiny diamonds that sprinkled the dark sky, there appeared a great shining star, a star that sparkled and gleamed with such a wondrous, brilliant light that... How much did he weigh? Asked Dominic. Who? The baby Jesus. I haven't got to the baby Jesus yet. I was an 8-pounder. My granny said I was like a plucked turkey with Dominic. Now, just listen to the story. You're spoiling it for all the other children. But I know how the story ends, he replied, undaunted. Then why don't you come out here and tell it to us, Dominic, I said, throwing in the towel. And so he did. Like a seasoned actor taking centre stage, he came out to the front of the class and recounted the Christmas story in such a simple, animated and confident way that we all listened in rapt silence. Once upon a time there was a man called Jesus and a lady called Mary, and they were friends and they played games together and they had fun. Then they had a wedding, and after the wedding they went home, and then they had some lunch and a drink, and then they set off for Bethlehem on their honeymoon, and they went on a donkey. When they got to Bethlehem, there was no room at the inn, so they had to stay in a barn round the back. And then Mary had a little baby, and she called him Jesus. And she put him in a manger, and all the animals were around him, and the big star shone up in the sky, and then the shepherds all came, and then the 3 kings came, and they all gave him presents because it was his birthday, and baby Jesus had plenty of milk because there was lots of cows about. There was silence at the end of Dominic's story, and then he looked at me and said, "Okay?" "Okay," I replied. "Very okay." On my way out that morning, a little girl with long blonde plaits and an angelic face approached me shyly. "I liked that story," she said quietly. "Did you?" I replied. "I'm glad. Thank you for telling me." "But Dominic tells it better than you do. Happy Christmas."
I made myself a snowball, as perfect as could be. I thought I'd keep it as a pet and let it sleep with me. I made it some pyjamas and a pillow for its head. Then last night it ran away, but first it wet the bed.
This must be a simply enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room for her. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. "I wonder, is that more mothballs?" she thought, stooping down to feel it with her hand. But instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. "This is very queer," she said, and went on a step or 2 further. Next moment, she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough, and even prickly. "Why, it is just like the branches of trees," exclaimed Lucy. And then she saw that there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at night time, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe, and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it is a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to still be daylight there. I can always get back if anything goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward. Crunch, crunch, over the snow and through the wood towards the other light. In about 10 minutes she reached it and found it was a lamp-post. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamp-post in the middle of a wood and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming towards her. And soon after that, a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamp-post. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upwards, he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet, he had goat's hooves. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice this at first because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler round his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with a short pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella. In the other arm he carried several brown paper parcels. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a faun. And when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the faun.
Lay pretty long in bed, and then rose, leaving my wife desirous to sleep, having sat up till 4 this morning seeing her maids make mince pies. I to church, where our parson Mills made a good sermon. Then home, and dined well on some good ribs of beef, roasted, and mince pies. Only my wife, brother, and Barker, and plenty of good wine of my own, and my heart full of true joy, and thanks to God Almighty for the goodness of my condition at this day. After dinner, I begun to teach my wife and Barker my song, It Is Decreed, which pleases me mightily, as now I have Mr. Hingston's bass. Then out and walked alone on foot to the temple, it being a fine frost, thinking to have seen a play all alone, but there, missing of any bills, concluded there was none, and so back home, and there with my brother reducing the names of all my books to an alphabet, which kept us till 7 or 8 at night, and then to supper, W. Hewer with us, and pretty merry, and then to my chamber to enter this day's journal only, and then to bed. My head a little thoughtful how to behave myself in the business of the victualling, which I think will be prudence to offer my service in doing something in passing the purser's accounts, thereby to serve the king, get honour to myself, and confirm me in my place in the victualling, which at present yields not enough work to deserve my wages.
It was a memorable Christmas for the world at war. Memorable for me too, because it was marked by a miracle. At Auschwitz, the various categories of prisoners, political, common criminals, social misfits, homosexuals, etc., were allowed to receive gift packages from home, but not the Jews. Anyway, from whom could the Jews have received them? From their families, exterminated or confined in the surviving ghettos? From the very few who had escaped the roundups, hidden in cellars, in attics, terrified and penniless? And who knew our address? For all the world knew, we were dead. And yet, a package did finally find its way to me through a chain of friends sent by my sister and my mother who were hidden in Italy. The package contained ersatz chocolates, cookies and powdered milk, but to describe its real value, the impact it had on me and my friend Alberto, is beyond the powers of ordinary language. In the camp, the terms eating, food, hunger had meanings totally different from their usual ones. That unexpected, improbable, impossible package was like a meteorite, a heavenly object charged with symbols, immensely precious and with an enormous momentum. We were no longer alone. A link with the outside world had been established, and there were delicious things to eat for days and days. But there were also serious practical problems to resolve immediately. We found ourselves in the situation of a passerby who is handed a gold ingot in full view of everyone. Where to put the food? How to keep it? How to protect it from other people's greediness? How to invest it wisely? Our year-old hunger kept pushing us towards the worst possible solution, to eat everything right then and there. But we had to resist that temptation. Our weakened stomachs could not have coped with the abuse. Within an hour, it would have ended in indigestion, or worse. We had no safe hiding places, so we distributed the food in all the regular pockets in our clothes and sewed secret ones inside the backs of our jackets, so that even in case of a body search, something could be saved. But in camp, the crowding, the total lack of privacy, the gossip and disorder was such that our secret quickly became an open one. In the space of a few days, we noticed that our companions were looking at us with different eyes. That's the point. They were looking at us the way you do at something or someone outside the norm, that no longer melts into the background but stands out. According to how much they liked the two Italians, they looked at us with envy, with understanding, complacency or open desire. Mendy, a Slovakian rabbi friend of mine, winked at me and said, "Mazel tov," the lovely Yiddish and Hebrew phrase used to congratulate someone on a happy event. On Christmas Day we worked as usual. I was sent along with the others to remove rubble and carry sacks of chemical products from a bombed warehouse to an undamaged one. When I got back to camp in the evening, I went to the wash house. I still had quite a lot of chocolate and powdered milk in my pockets, so I waited until there was a free spot in the corner farthest from the entrance. I hung my jacket on a nail right behind me. No one could have approached without my seeing him. I began to wash when out of the corner of my eye I saw my jacket rising in the air. I turned, but it was already too late. The jacket, with all its contents, and with my registration number sewn on the breast, was already out of reach. Someone had lowered a string and hook from the small window above the nail. I ran outside, half undressed as I was, but no one was there. No one had seen anything, no one knew anything, and along with everything else, I was now without a jacket. We divided up the contents of Alberto's pockets. His has remained unscathed, and he proceeded to display his finest philosophical resources. We two had eaten more than half the food, right? And the rest wasn't completely wasted. Some other famished man was celebrating Christmas at our expense, maybe even blessing us. And anyway, we could be sure of one thing, that this would be our last Christmas of war and imprisonment.
The bells of waiting Advent ring. The tortoise stove is lit again, and lamp oil light across the night has caught the streaks of winter rain in many a stained glass window sheen, from crimson lake to hooker's green. The holly in the windy hedge, and round the manor house the yew, will soon be stripped to deck the ledge, the altar, font and arch and pew, so that the villagers can say, "The church looks nice" on Christmas Day. Provincial public houses blaze, and corporation tramcars clang. On lighted tenements I gaze, where paper decorations hang and bunting in the red town hall says, Merry Christmas to you all. And London shops on Christmas Eve are strung with silver bells and flowers as hurrying clerks the city leave to pigeon-haunted classic towers and marble clouds go scudding by the many-steepled London sky. And girls in slacks remember Dad, and oafish louts remember Mum, and sleepless children's hearts are glad, and Christmas morning bells say, Come, even to the shining ones who dwell safe in the Dorchester Hotel. And is it true? And is it true? This most tremendous tale of all, seen in a stained glass window's hue, a baby in an ox's stall. The maker of the stars and sea became a child on earth for me? And is it true? For if it is, no loving fingers tying strings around those tissued fripperies, the sweet and silly Christmas things, bath salts and inexpensive scent, and hideous tie so kindly meant. No love that in a family dwells, no carolling in frosty air, nor all the steeple-shaking bells can with this single truth compare, that God was man in Palestine and lives today in bread and wine.
I remember that we went singing carols once when there wasn't the shaving of a moon to light the flying streets. At the end of a long road was a drive that led up to a large house, and we stumbled up in the darkness of the drive that night, each one of us afraid, each one holding a stone in his hand in case, and all of us too brave to say a word. The wind through the trees made noises as of old and unpleasant, and maybe web-footed men wheezing in caves. We reached the black bulk of the house. "What shall we give them then? Hark the herald?" "No," said Jack. "Good King Wenceslas. I'll count 3. 1, 2, 3. And we began to sing, our voices high and seemingly distant in the snow-felted darkness round the house that was occupied by nobody we knew. We stood close together near the dark door. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, and then a small, dry voice, like the voice of someone who has not spoken for a long time, joined our singing. A small, dry, eggshell voice from the other side of the door. A small, dry voice through the keyhole. And when we stopped running, we were outside our house. Oh, the front room was lovely. Balloons floated under the hot water bottle gulping gas. Everything was good again and shone over the town. "Perhaps it was a ghost," Jim said. "Perhaps it was trolls," Dan said, who was always reading. "Let's go in and see if there's any jelly left," Jack said. And we did that. Always on Christmas night there was music. An uncle played the fiddle, a cousin sang Cherry Ripe, and another uncle sang Drake's Drum. It was very warm in the little house. Auntie Hannah, who had got on the parsnip wine, sang a song about bleeding hearts and death, and then another in which she said her heart was like a bird's nest, and then everybody laughed again. And then I went to bed. Looking through my bedroom window, out into the moonlight and the unending smoke-coloured snow, I could see the lights in the windows of all the other houses on our hill, and hear the music rising from them up the the long, steady, falling night. I turned the gas down. I got into bed. I said some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I slept.
A little fir grew in the midst of the wood, contented and happy as young trees should. His body was straight and his boughs were clean, and summer and winter the bountiful sheen of his needles bedecked him from top to root in a beautiful, all the year evergreen suit. But a trouble came into his heart one day, when he saw that the other trees were gay in the wonderful raiment that summer weaves of manifold shapes and kinds of leaves. He looked at his needles so stiff and small, and thought that his dress was the poorest of all. Then jealousy clouded the little tree's mind, and he said to himself, "It was not very kind to give such an ugly old dress to a tree. If the fays of the forest would only ask me, I'd tell them how I should like to be dressed, in a garment of gold to bedazzle the rest." So he fell asleep, but his dreams were bad. When he woke in the morning, his heart was glad, for every leaf that his boughs could hold was made of the brightest beaten gold. "Oh, why did I wish for golden leaves?" the fir tree said. "I forgot that thieves would be sure to rob me in passing by. If the fairies would give me another try, I'd wish for something that cost much less, and be satisfied with glass for my dress." Then he fell asleep, and just as before, the fairies granted his wish once more. When the night was gone and the sun rose clear, the tree was a crystal chandelier. But a rude young wind through the forest dashed, in a reckless temper, and quickly smashed the delicate leaves. With a clashing sound, they broke into pieces and fell on the ground, like a silvery, shimmering shower of hail, and the tree stood naked and bare to the gale. Then he sighed and groaned, but his voice was weak. He was so ashamed that he could not speak. He knew at last that he had been a fool to think of breaking the forest rule, and choosing a dress himself to please because he envied the other trees. But it couldn't be helped. It was now too late. He must make up his mind to a leafless fate. So he let himself sink in a slumber deep, but he moaned and he tossed in his troubled sleep, till the morning touched him with joyful beam, and he woke to find it was all a dream. For there in his evergreen dress he stood, a pointed fir in the midst of the wood. His branches were sweet with the balsam smell, his needles were green when the white snow fell, and always contented and happy was he, the very best kind of a Christmas tree.
Do you know why we put tinsel on our Christmas tree? No? Then let me tell you the story of how the first tinsel appeared for the first time on the first tree. A long, long time ago, in a small town in Eastern Europe, there was a mother and her children who loved Christmas more than anything in the world. It was their favourite time of year, and though they didn't have very much money, they would look forward to preparing for this special feast day in their own special way. Throughout the year, any scraps of brightly coloured ribbon or fabric that were left over from the clothes their mother made them, or pieces of shiny paper or cardboard they found, were put safely in a drawer until December. Their mother would save a little money to buy a tree, and then the fun would begin. They would look at the tree, and depending on what the tree told them, they would use these treasures to make ornaments and decorations to make the tree look even more beautiful. Now, one Christmas Eve, the children and their mother had finished decorating the tree, and it was a particularly fine specimen. They stood back and were proud, and went to bed knowing that this was a tree that would make St. Nicholas smile when he came to leave some small gifts beneath it. Up in the attic in their tiny house, another family was preparing for Christmas. A family of spiders. Now, some people might be afraid of spiders, but the truth is they feel joy just as much as we do. And on this particular Christmas Eve, the youngest spider was very excited and very curious. He wanted to see what the people had been doing downstairs that had caused them to laugh so much and to sound so happy. Keeping to the shadows, he crept out of the attic and climbed down to take a look, and there he saw the most beautiful sight, the Christmas tree. He was so overwhelmed with its beauty that he decided to explore every inch of it, and using his silken threads, he climbed every branch and looked at every ornament and decoration and felt the joy that the people had felt in decorating it. Before going back to his family, he decided to take one more look at the whole tree and clambered down to the ground so he could take in the view. But imagine his dismay when he saw that what had once been a beautiful tree was now covered in his silken threads, and that all the beautiful ornaments were hidden by the greyness of his web.
He was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come into the tank. His hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen, as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello?" growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?" "I am very sorry, sir," said Bob. "I am behind my time." "You are?" repeated Scrooge. "Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please." "It's only once a year, sir," pleaded Bob, appearing from the tank. "It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "Now I'll tell you what, my friend," said Scrooge. "I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore," he continued, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again, "and therefore, I'm about to raise your salary." Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him and calling to the people in the court for help and a straight waistcoat. "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge, with an earnestness that could not be mistaken as he clapped him on the back. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavour to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one.
When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with the flock, then the work of Christmas begins, to find the lost, to heal those broken in spirit, to feed the hungry, to release the oppressed, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among all the peoples, to make a little music in the heart, in all that we do and all that we say. Then the work of Christmas begins. "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there.
The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads, and Mama, in her kerchief and I in my cap, had just settled down for a long winter's nap.
When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter. I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash.
The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave the lustre of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer.
With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name.
Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all.
As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too.
And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound.
He was dressed all in fur, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack.
His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow.
The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly.
He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled all the stockings, and then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose.
He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight,
Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night.